democracy. And His Majesty the King has stirred up controversy by appearing to get political in his Christmas message. Should the monarch be expressing political beliefs? And did you have a problem with it? And my panel tonight, Lord Moylan, the Conservative peer, and James Schneider, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. First of all, though, we're going to get your latest news headlines with Mark White.
Hello there, the latest headlines from the GB News Centre. And GB News can confirm that more than 1,000 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day, as hundreds more crossed today. It comes as the Home Office confirmed 407 arrived on Boxing Day. 451 made the illegal crossing on Christmas Day. On Friday so far, 5 small boats have crossed from France with at least 200 migrants on board. They take the total number who've arrived in the UK this year to more than 36,000. It also marks another grim milestone of 150,000 small boat migrants since the crisis began in 2018. The Prime Minister has paid tribute to his brother Nick, who died on Boxing Day after suffering from cancer. Sir Keir said in a statement, "My brother Nick was a wonderful man. He met all the challenges life threw at him with courage and good humour." Downing Street has confirmed the Prime Minister has now cancelled his planned holiday to be with his family. The UK's national rail network is facing severe disruption as major engineering works, including for HS2, are prioritised over the coming days. Western services out of Paddington are particularly badly affected. To add to the misery, Avanti workers are preparing to stage a series of strikes over pay negotiations. Travel expert Simon Calder said the work was necessary.
The railways to start turning themselves around and stop taking £400 per second in taxpayer subsidy. They've got to attract new people in. And if you're one of these occasional travellers, and every time you look at it, it's Christmas or Easter or whatever, and there aren't any trains to your local station, just looking up here, I can see the Crewe is off limits today, as is Liverpool and Chester. You're going to think, well, I'm not going to bother. I'm going to get in the car, or indeed get one of the excellent long-distance bus services. But they say the work has to be done. It will improve the system, make it more resilient, and hopefully things will get rather better.
The Metropolitan Police has charged a man with 4 counts of attempted murder. It comes after 4 pedestrians were hit by a car in the West End of London on Christmas Day. Anthony Gilheeney has also been charged with causing serious injury by driving whilst disqualified and for the possession of a bladed weapon in a public place. One victim is still in hospital in a critical condition. Sources have told the Reuters news agency that Russia's air defences were responsible for downing a passenger plane that crashed in Kazakhstan, killing 38 people. The Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed as it was diverting from an area of southern Russia where Moscow has repeatedly used air defence systems against Ukrainian drones. Former Pentagon senior advisor Ann Daly says Russia must accept responsibility.
If Russia tries to deny this or cover this up, it could lead to a rift in Russian relations with Azerbaijan. If Russia doesn't apologize for what it's done and provide greater clarity in its airspace management, that could also lead to further degradation of relations between Russia and other countries.
The Ministry of Defence has lost hundreds of phones, laptops and other devices over the last 2 years, according to new government figures. A Glock pistol and 3 older guns, including a World War I era machine gun, also went missing. 744 electronic devices have been lost or stolen since the start of last year, including 260 phones and 314 laptops. And those are your latest headlines. We'll have more for you later.
Thanks very much, Mark. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. with me, Darren Grimes, in for Michelle. Joining me until 7, my panel tonight, Lord Moylan, Conservative Party peer, and James Schneider, former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. Now, my friends, as always, this show is as much about your views as it is ours. Get your views in at gbnews.com/your say. I've got that open here now. The row between Reform UK leader Nigel Farage and Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch has deepened today, with Reform UK even hinting at legal action against the Tory leader. They've actually opened up their back end on their website tonight to allow the papers to check the accounts and see what's actually going on in that website. It follows Reform's claims that it now, of course, has more members than the Conservative Party. That's according to the digital tracker that you can see on your television sets right now. But however, Kemi Badenoch has slammed the announcement as fake and accused Reform UK of issuing misleading figures. Now, as you would expect, Farage has hit back, accusing her of being bitter, upset and angry. The Reform Party chairman, Zia Youssef, has suggested that Nigel Farage could sue over her claim of those fabricated numbers. The row highlights that stark divide on the right of British politics. But which party will end up coming out on top? And should the leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition really be spending her time getting into these kinds of online spats? Well, a Conservative Party spokesman told GB News this: Reform has delivered a Labour government that has cruelly cut winter payments for 10 million pensioners, put the future of family farming and security at risk, and launched a devastating raid on jobs, which will leave working people paying the price. A vote for Reform this coming May is a vote for a Labour council. Only the Conservatives can stop this. Now we're going to go to my brilliant panel. Daniel, I'll have to start with you, obviously, given the Conservative Party narrative here. This was a foolish thing for Kemi Badenoch to do, was it not? The first error of her leadership.
Oh, I don't understand all of this, to be perfectly honest, Darren. It's very complicated. I'm just an old fogey. I know what's on the internet. I don't know anything about back ends. But apparently she is onto something. There's something in here called an automatic coded uptick. And I have to say that sounds a bit dodgy to me. And if she's pointing it out, I'm sure she's got good reason for doing so.
But the Financial Times, one of their journalists, has looked into this. They've been given access.
This is the Financial Times you're quoting, Darren.
Yeah.
It's authoritative.
Well,
is this a first?
They
GBNews?
Well, they have been given access to the back end of the website,
the
and they said that everything looks hunky-dory, happy days to me.
Well, she may have made a mistake about it, but she's an engineer. She understands these things. I don't. And it sounds to me that an automatic coded uptick, I mean, that sounds like you're putting on the numbers, whatever's happening, whether you're getting them or not. I mean, that sounds very odd to me. James,
the fact of the matter is, what she's done here, the Leader of the Opposition, is actually highlight and promote Reform in a way in which she shouldn't be attempting to do.
No, on this basis, you wouldn't say that she's going to lead the right if this is what this is about. Every single senior person in Reform will be absolutely licking their lips.
Yeah.
What they've tried to do is start a row with the Conservatives by saying they have more members than the Conservatives in the hope that they will take the bait. And they didn't just take the bait a little bit. They didn't just send out some anonymous member of the shadow cabinet to sort of say the numbers look dodgy. Kemi Badenoch, the leader herself, came out, and now the row can go on. And most people sitting at home, they're watching politics a bit with the volume turned down. It's only really when there's a big row that they hear it. And now what they're hearing is, oh, Reform's got quite a lot of members. Mm-hmm. And the Conservatives feel a bit worried about that. And that tells the bigger story, which is Reform is broadly on the rise and the Tories are, at best, static. And that's the story Reform want to tell. And Kemi Badenoch has helped them do it.
And Daniel, I guess your argument would be, well, hang on a minute, does this really matter? If you look at the size of the Reform Party in Parliament, 5 members of Parliament, compared to, 121 members of the Conservative Party. And actually, if you looked at the Labour membership during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of that party, 500,000?
Up to 600,000 at the end, yeah.
And that didn't do much for him, did it, as much as winning elections is concerned?
I think there is an important point. Yeah, those are very good points, Darren, and I would have made them had you not made them for me. Thank you. But I mean, I'll develop them a little bit. I mean, of course, it's important to notice the fact that Reform UK appears to have a degree of momentum at the moment. It is putting on members, and they definitely do represent a threat. They are rising in the polls. But the question is, under the first-past-the-post system that we've got, what's the likely outcome of that? And the fact of the matter is that the likely outcome is a repeat at the local elections and in the Welsh Assembly in 2 years' time, that you will end up getting a large Labour majority as a result of the vote for more conservative and right-wing-minded people being split in the way that seems to be. So that's what you've really got to worry about, I think, is not worry about rows between Conservative and Reform, but worry about the continued dominance of Labour at every level of our society when we see them behaving so destructively, which we're going to examine in some stories later on.
I think what Daniel said, and also the quote that you read out from the Conservative official spokesperson, shows the problem that they have, because not one bit of that, either what Daniel was just saying or what you read out from the spokesperson, says anything about what the Conservative Party stand for or would do. And most people think that politicians are going to attack other politicians. So if you say, we don't like Reform because they're not very good, or we don't like Labour because they're not very good, it doesn't tell any story. Nobody knows anything about you. And this is what the problem that Kemi Badenoch and the Tories have at the moment, is because they're trying to not say anything, but try to say something sometimes, but no one knows what they're for. They're not coming up with any policies. They're sniping at Labour. Fine, that's their job as the opposition. That's not the basis to inspire or organise or gain new members.
Well, but James, do you think that Daniel is correct in his analysis that actually under first past the post, that actually the electoral system doesn't lend itself to new insurgent political parties rising up?
Of course, it's objectively true that the first-past-the-post system mitigates against having multiple parties. But when you look at the map now and look how small a whole number of majorities are, how many seats were won with only 30 to 40% of the vote, and the volatility of politics. I mean, 5 months ago, or whatever, 6 months ago at the start of the general election, Labour were on 45% in the polls. They're now on 25% in the polls. Clearly, there's not very much support in our whole political class, so the whole thing is very volatile. So this could be a moment where there's a breakthrough, and it has happened once before. You know, the Labour Party replaced the Liberal Party as the main opposition to the Tories, so these things can happen again.
So, Daniel, are you going to be crossing the aisle and becoming a Reform parliamentarian anytime soon?
No, I think I'm a Conservative front-bench spokesman now, you know, Darren. I don't see myself becoming a solitary. I think there aren't any members of the Reform UK.
Not as far as I'm aware,
in
no.
the House of Lords. I think I'd be quite lonely if I was...
Well, I know, Daniel, you respect the views of our viewers here at GB News, and Julie has written in, and Julie says it's undignified for the leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition to be engaging in an online Twitter spat. Whoever advised her ought to be sacked. I mean, would you be going that far to say that this is a problem with advisors? She's very much her own woman, isn't she, Kemi Badenoch?
I think the fact is that Kemi Badenoch has said she's going to say what she's made it clear that her approach to life is that she's going to say what she thinks. And if she's angry about something like this, which she thinks is dodgy, then she's going to say it. And I don't think it's a question of being dignified or undignified. That's what she felt was the right thing to do.
OK. Putting the fact of the matter of the almost 600,000 members that the Labour Party had, I don't know what that's gone down to, but it has gone down.
About half, maybe.
Yeah, since Sir Keir Starmer took over. Do you think actually grassroots membership of political parties, because if you go back to 1997, even after that disastrous defeat that the Tories suffered, they had 300,000 members. Look at party membership now, it's on the decline. We've spoken before about your focus on democracy elsewhere as well. How come in other countries there seems to be a drive for grassroots membership, and in this country there's a complete rejection of it? Is it just the state of the uni party in this country?
Well, it isn't only in Britain, but there's been a long secular decline in mass politics. And that's not just a British phenomenon, that's also happened in Western Europe and in the US. But you get blips within it. And the Corbyn moment was very much one of those. Membership of the Labour Party going into the 2015 general election was down at 150, 160,000.
And it was only like £3 to join, wasn't it?
It was £3 to get a registered supporter, so
Right.
you could get a vote. But so there's a general downward decline because politics is further removed from most people's lives. But there is a desire for people to be involved in politics, and you see this every time there is a big moment. With the Scottish independence campaign, that boosted SNP membership. You also saw with the quick rise of the Brexit Party in 2019 and the massive growth of membership of the Labour Party, there is a desire out there from people to be involved and to have grassroots politics. But most of our political and media class don't like that, and they view democracy as bullying, and they don't want any of it. So they shut their doors and they make the parties less open to their own members.
All right, Daniel, last word to you then, briefly if you would. Do you actually think that, looking at the membership of the Conservative Party in decline, that actually the lack of policies will lead to further decline?
I think it would be ridiculous for the leader of the Conservative Party to be writing a manifesto for the next general election 4 years ahead of the date of the election. So I don't think the lack of specific policy is important. As James said, the important thing, in a sense, you form policy by opposition at this stage. You show your colours by what you oppose.
Well, the only opposition that many of our viewers are seeing, Daniel, is from reform.
Well, no, you've seen, I can assure you, if you tuned into the House of Lords, you would see a great deal of opposition. I would just advise you at the moment, for sheer amusement value, to tune in for hours and listen to the football governance bill being debated at huge length in the House of Lords, where it's clearly detested on all sides.
Fair enough.
There's a lot of opposition going on, I can assure you. But that's all I'd say on that, really.
All right, we'll come back to my wonderful panel in just a moment. But first of all, if you didn't get everything on your Christmas list this year, how about £50,000 in tax-free cash for the new year? It really could all be yours in our biggest ever Great British giveaway. Here's all the details you need to enter.
There's still plenty of time to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Coming up, new research from housing charity Shelter shows that 2/3 of private renters struggle to pay their rent. But are politicians brave enough to tackle the real causes of the housing crisis? See you after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And the latest series of Big Brother has just wrapped up. And as always, the housemates managed to cause a stir.
Yeah, that's an understatement. After 5 weeks of drama and twists and turns, 6 housemates were left to battle it out for a £90,000 prize.
Well, our next guest was there to the bitter end, coming third in this year's competition.
6 weeks you were in there.
Oh, I tell you what, it was a long time.
What goes through your mind? Is it, do you start to go a bit sort of, what do they call it, cabin fever?
Yeah.
Do you go a bit nutty?
Like, at times, not that I've ever been in prison, but I kind of likened it to being in jail, particularly when we were having to eat the porridge with water, no sugar, or, you know, that was difficult. And the feeling that you just can't leave. I mean, you can, but... You know, it was,
You can,
tough.
but you won't get your hands on that prize money.
No, exactly.
You made it to the end.
Yeah.
And it's quite a big house, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel as though you can get away from housemates if they're annoying you a bit, or does it feel like your hot house with
no,
people you don't like very much?
If you're sort of you know, if you're not comfortable with a certain conversation or something like that, you can always take yourself and move away. But can you have time to yourself? No. Not really. I mean, even you might think, do you know what, I'll just go and lock myself in the toilet for a few minutes. There's a camera and there's a mic in there, so you can't escape that. And then you're obviously wearing a mic, so there is that little feeling of, you know, I could just do with having 5 minutes to myself, but you can't really get it.
You've met up with one side of the house, but not the other side yet. But is that still on the cards, do you think?
I hope so, yeah, because I liked every single person in that house, despite a few whispers on the internet, you know, like, do you not like this? I liked everybody in the house, never had a bad word with anybody, so...
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Darren Grimes. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is, of course, James Schneider and Daniel Moylan. Now, you've been getting in touch about that first topic that we were discussing there, and Arnie says, does it really matter how many MPs members reform have? How many members, rather? They should be focusing on getting more MPs, is what Arnie says. John says the number of members does not win elections, policies do. Chris says it's the Conservatives who are responsible for us being lumbered with a Labour government. The fact that over the last decade the Conservatives have moved towards becoming a clone of the Lib Dems has forced those, that's his words, not mine, has forced those to the right of centre to move elsewhere. Reform is going to become the real opposition to the Labour Party. It might take Parliament, but they will get to that position. And just finally, Maureen says Kemi Badenoch should provide evidence for her accusation that the Reform Party is falsifying the numbers of its membership, or apologise for wrongly accusing it of doing so. Thank you very much for your opinions. Keep them coming in. gbnews.com/your say is the link you need. Now, new research from the housing charity Shelter shows that 2/3 of private renters struggle to pay their rent. Separate research shows London is heading into the worst downturn in affordable housing supply in decades, as inflation, high interest rates and building safety costs hammer the finances of housing associations. Now, one thing that struck me is that neither of these reports actually mention the impact of migration and what that's doing to the housing market. And by the way, folks, we get told by politicians now that in order to build more houses, we need more foreign builders. Well, more foreign builders need more houses. The cycle goes on and on and on. Is migration a primary driver of the housing crisis? Or are systemic issues like insufficient supply, rising costs and policy failures more to blame than the migrant issue? Well, my panel will chew the fat on that one, I'm sure. Come on, James, who's to blame for this? I mean, you've experienced how terrible the housing situation is, especially in London, and it ain't getting any better.
No, and it doesn't look like it is going to get any better. We've got a really horrific housing market in Britain, and especially in our big cities. And part of it is because of the lack of council housing. We've had, over the last 40 years, a tremendous sell-off of council housing, and they haven't been rebuilt. The lie, and it was a lie, was that for each one that was sold off, a new house would be built, and that's not what's happened.
That was never.
They have gone into large landlords. For example, Ian Gow, the Thatcher's housing minister, her son owns dozens, or at least did a few years ago when it was reported in the press, owns dozens of former council houses that were bought and then sold under right to buy. So we've got a very big problem that...
Hang on, because Angela Rayner benefited from right to buy and now she's the one that's scrapping it.
Right, and she should be scrapping it. Right to buy has been an absolutely terrible policy, but as has a whole host of other things which have prevented the building of council housing. Now, it's all very well building more houses, and we do need to build more houses, but the type of housing is extremely important, because if you build, the theory goes, if you build a lot of luxury houses up at the top of the market, it somehow trickles down, and that isn't the case at all. What we have is a huge shortage of housing which is affordable relative to people's incomes, so that they can one day save and buy a home. And you can't do that because of such a market failure. You can't do that without a really quite large state intervention into the rental sector in two ways. One is to build a lot of homes for social rent, and the second is to enforce from developers not just this affordable level, which is supposed to be 80% of market rate, actually social housing in our developments.
Daniel, I want to give a little shout out to Right to Buy, because on a personal, anecdotal level, you know, it completely changed the behaviour of the household I was brought up in. When you own property, your ex-council house, then you have something, you have security, you have something to pass on, and you also take care of it better because of the fact that it's yours. I think there is something to property ownership and that promise of a property-owning democracy. But James is equally right to say that there has been a complete failure to replace the housing stock that was ultimately sold off.
Well, there was never a promise to replace it one for one, because back in the 1980s, there wasn't a housing shortage. And remember, Right to Buy did not reduce by one iota the number of houses that existed. It simply changed the tenure. There was never a promise to replace them. There was no housing shortage, no need for such a pledge, and nobody would have wanted it at the time. And you're absolutely right. Property ownership really ought to be a right, not simply a concession from the state. There's this huge push on the left at the moment, it's been going on for years, to have more council houses built. If you remember, it's council housing that was built in large amounts in the 1960s and 70s that has turned out to be the worst maintained, because they never have any money to maintain it, the most dilapidated, the housing that gets blown up at some of those council blocks that are actually, you put dynamite under them and blow them up. That is what they have come to, many of them. And they really are, it was a disaster. The last people you would ever ask to build housing, in my view, and I was a councillor for 28 years, and I didn't have this view at the outset, but I came to this view. The last people you would ever ask to build housing would be local councils. They're simply not equipped and fit to do it. And that's what people want. So they say, oh, this is a solution. This is a solution for the ordinary person who wants to get on the housing ladder, is to build more council housing. The other thing they ignore is that council housing, up until the 1970s, was there largely for local people, most of them working class people with jobs. The right to council housing changed from the 1970s onwards, so that it was based on need. That might sound like a very good thing, and now you can make a defence of it. But the result is that very little of it goes to working people, people with jobs, to get into the council housing at all. It's not the people who are trying to get on the housing ladder who will ever get the council housing. So James accuses me of saying, well, we want luxury housing and it'll trickle down. I've never ever said that. But he seems to be saying the other. You're going to have lots and lots of council housing and it will sort of trickle up and somehow people will get on the housing ladder. It's fantasy. It's an ideological commitment to the state owning property, partly to preclude and prevent ordinary people from owning their own property and having the independence that you refer to.
So is this ideological for you?
There's it's something that I believe, and it's also grounded in fact. You can call that what you like. There's one thing I do agree with Daniel about, which is the change in the law, I think it was in 77 or 78, to move, at the time where a third of people in the country lived in social housing. To move it away from community and towards need was a mistake. And social housing should be mixed. It should be housing that you have mixed communities, and it's not only for those most in need. But if we have the system that we have now, it is essentially we are using taxpayers' money to subsidise private landlords, because the housing benefit bill is something like 23 or 24 billion pounds a year.
OK.
And that is because we don't have social housing for people to live in. If we had sufficient social housing and some reasonable controls on rent rises, then we would greatly reduce the housing benefit bill, which is essentially a subsidy to private landlords.
So rent controls, is that the answer, Daniel?
Well, rent controls is the answer if you want to close down the private rented sector completely, which is what existed. I am old enough. I'm terribly old, Darren. I am old enough. When I first came to London, there was no private rented sector. Nobody ever put flats out for rent. You either went and lived in digs with somebody as a landlady, or if you were really lucky, as I was, you had a mate who had a house and you could actually rent a room in their house and live with your university friends. But that was actually quite rare. There was no private rented sector because nearly everything was rent controlled. So nobody in their right minds would put a property on the market and then find that A, they could never get rid of the tenant, however badly they behaved, and B, the rent would only go up the way some tribunal said, not in line with the market.
Well,
there was no private rented sector. You want to go back to that?
Yeah, well, no. I don't.
Well, that's where you're heading.
But can we engage with the elephant in the room, though, which is David has written in and says, surprise, surprise, there was no housing shortage in the 1980s, as Lord Moylan said. But due to population explosion, 55 million to nearly 70 million, of course there is now. I mean, there's a good point there, is there not?
So in that period of time, the increase in the population, which is not an explosion, doesn't explain...
1 million people coming to this country last year, it sounds like a pretty big explosion.
You said over the whole... OK, well, that's 1 year. You said over the whole course of the period we're talking about a 40-year period, the amount the population has gone up is not the demand aspect that has led to rents where the average rent in London is £2,200 a month. That is not the cause of that. Should we have built more housing over that period of time, and do we need to if we're going to have an expanding population? Yes, absolutely. And we do have below average for rich countries houses per population. But the amount of building wouldn't be... you would have to build 2.5 million homes in order to get up to the OECD average. And this is also countries that also have housing crises. In Canada's big cities, they have similar problems to the ones that we have.
Yeah, and Canada also has experienced an increase in migration over recent years. Certainly under the Trudeau administration, they've been getting lots of pushback, as have the Tories in this country. But we'll come back to my panel for their thoughts in just a second, because coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is delegating critical powers to unelected quangos, task forces and advisory councils. And what were your thoughts on the King's speech? Let me know, because I was on air and a few of you were pretty angry by it. See you after this.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this weekend, there's still going to be lots of cloud and murk around, also some drizzle, but likely to see some brighter skies by the time we reach Sunday. And where we're seeing those areas of more persistent rain and drizzle is just to the far northwest of the country, where we do have a frontal system, and elsewhere we do have high pressure, bringing lots of settled conditions, but lots of cloud and moisture trapped underneath that high. And it remains fairly similar as we head into the overnight period. Still plenty of cloud around, a chance we could see some drizzle with more persistent areas of rain just to the far northwest of Scotland, slowly edging its way into western parts of Northern Ireland by the early hours of Saturday. And those cloudy skies means temperatures aren't going to change too much compared to what they were during the day, mostly in the mid-single figures. To start off the weekend then, across the northwest of Scotland, a damp start with outbreaks of rain, but to the very far north we may see some clearer spells, though we can't rule out some showers just moving in around coasts. And elsewhere across Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, still plenty of cloud around, some outbreaks of rain and drizzle just to the west of Northern Ireland, and fairly similar across England and Wales too. Cloudy with some fog around, some plenty of grey skies around to start the weekend too, and still some drizzly outbreaks, particularly around hilly areas. And it remains fairly similar through much of the day, though those longer spells of rain just moving into the Scottish borders, northern parts of England towards the end of the end of the day. And clearer to the north of this, may see some sunny spells here, but still plenty of showers moving in around coasts. And temperatures around the same, once again struggling under cloudier skies, so feeling chilly where you do see the grey skies. And then for Sunday, once again, still plenty of cloud around, but by the afternoon likely to see a few more sunnier spells, but still plenty of rain across Scotland and some quite strong winds here at times for the second half of the weekend too. But on the whole, likely the better day of the weekend for many, but turning unsettled as we head into the new year with strong winds and some heavy outbreaks of rain.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long queues in Cheshire heading south down the M6 tonight from junction 19 to 18 midway, even the Knutsford and Middlewich exits, and medical emergencies closing off the inside end. Emergency services remain on scene. It's crawling past the scene. In Northamptonshire, the M1 is down to a single lane northbound just before 17 at the M45. The motorway was briefly held following an accident, but it's squeezing past the scene. Queues nearly back to junction 16 at Daventry. On the M1 in Hertfordshire, 2 of the 4 lanes are closed southbound just before the M25, heading towards London at the scene of an accident. No trains running through London Paddington and London Liverpool Street stations today for the engineering works, and there's a limited service on many other train operators. Most of London Overground is also part suspended. Worth checking before you travel if you're setting out, and that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Darren Grimes. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock is, of course, James Schneider and Lord Moylan. Now, after years in opposition, Labour finally has the chance to govern. But instead of empowering selected ministers, of course, voted for by you, Starmer is delegating critical powers to unelected quangos, task forces and advisory councils. It's enough to make me shudder. Since July, 25 of these bodies have been created, working out at 1 per week, each adding a new layer of bureaucracy, regulation and unaccountable decision-making removed from you and the ballot box. This comes as a report by the Resolution Foundation has said that almost 1 in 5 workers will be employees of the state by the end of the decade, as Labour's spending plans increase the size of the public sector. And of course, you marry that with the fact that there are more people on benefits than there are actual taxpayers. Does the rise of unelected bodies with significant power pose a threat to democracy, and the enlargement of the state ultimately mean that you as a citizen get smaller? Well, let's discuss. Daniel, I mean, the size is extraordinary, but I remember David Cameron promising a bonfire of the quangos. Well, that didn't happen, actually, because Blair set them all up. I think that was a deliberate move, a new Labour move, to actually entrench its power in these unelected bodies, removed from the ballot box. And the Tories did naff all about them, I'm afraid.
I'm afraid that's right on the whole. I mean, there might have been a little bit of kindling of
yes.
the quangos, but I don't think there was actually what you'd call a bonfire. I think that's fair. And I think Labour setting them up has 2 drivers. The first is, as you say, I think it entrenches power in unaccountable bodies. That's every time you hear this is an independent body, you should remove the word independent and put unaccountable, because that's actually what it is. And I think that's one of the big drivers of dissatisfaction with politics, because you can no longer talk to your local MP about most of this stuff, because he'll say, oh, it's all decided by an independent, unaccountable body that isn't responsible to anybody. And they're spreading that further. I've been thinking a lot about this. Somebody said to me the other day, this is a socialist government. I said, not really so. It forced me to think about it. It sent me 3 or 4 months to work it out. It's not really a socialist government, but it is a government which thinks only in terms of the public sector. The public sector is the answer to everything for the Labour Party. There is no room for and that's partly because they only know the public sector. They have no experience of anything else. So it's the public sector that's the answer to everything. So a larger civil service means a better government in their minds. More and more quangos means they're doing their job.
How's that worked out?
They don't actually even see the problem.
Yes.
Because they never look at it from any other perspective.
Daniel has a good point. The size of the civil service, James, has expanded, but our faith and confidence in public services has decreased. So you can't make the argument that an enlargement of the state has led to better outcomes.
So let's take these two stories separately, because they actually are quite separate. The one about civil service headcount, it's saying it will rise a little bit back up to levels around where it was in the 90s and in the 2000s, and lower than it was for most of our post-war period. So that's a slightly different thing. The point about the quangos and having an unaccountable large elements of the state, big important decisions that are unaccountable and away from democracy, Daniel is completely right on that. And we have the biggest one of those is the Bank of England and operational independence of the Bank of England, where huge democratic decisions, and we would probably want opposite decisions being made. But the fact that the biggest policy decisions that have been made in your and my lifetime, which are quantitative easing after the financial crisis and in COVID, happened with no public debate whatsoever. These are decisions which are taken away from politics, therefore away from the media, therefore away from us as citizens.
And they used to be taken by the Chancellor of the Exchequer until 1997.
Rightly so. And now a number of these quangos, if you look at them, some of them will be perfectly reasonable boards for something or other, and some of them won't be. But what it speaks to is I don't think it's a public sector focused Labour Party. It's a kind of bureaucratic managerial Labour Party. And these are little bureaucratic elements that they think will help them run things better. And running things better doesn't mean having reference back to the people that it's meant to serve. So none of these have new ways, for example, that consumers, that citizens, that taxpayers, that whoever might be can have input into these decisions. Of course, they might have consultations in the same way that everyone does a consultation, which is your smoke screen for saying, well, look, we did ask some people, and here's a big report that we outsource. And this is going back to your point about why does the public service not get better while the headcount doesn't fall dramatically? So much of it is outsourced, so much of it is handed over to management consultants and companies like Serco who don't have a public service ethos.
And who, if I may say
Yes,
so,
of course.
mean that the actual number of civil servants is much larger than the employed number, because so much of the work is just outsourced by civil servants to either big accountancy firms or Serco or whatever it might be to do their work, and all they're doing is checking it and then saying, well, it's an independent report, so we can't be blamed.
And Daniel, what worries me is that a lot of these new quangos are linked to environmental causes. Now, I see that as net zero already, in my opinion, is undemocratic in the way in which it was put in place. This target that has had a profound impact, the biggest, I would argue, policy proposal to come into law, be signed into law with a nodding of the head by Theresa May. And
it was actually voted for by Parliament.
Eventually it was, yes, but not originally. So I worry that these quangos are there to actually just remove politicians from the equation altogether, because the pesky blighters might want something different to how, the government has legislated.
Well, the politicians, on that particular point, which is slightly separate, the politicians remain in charge. Net zero by 2050 sits in an Act of Parliament, and politicians can change Acts of Parliament.
I wish they would.
Big questions, well, I think one of the big questions that they will have to face at some point, and probably quite soon, not in this Parliament, but at some point beyond it, is whether net zero needs to be changed by Act of Parliament. So it remains in the hands of politicians to alter that target. But I agree with you in general terms that net zero is consuming more and more of the activities of the state, in the same way that the European Union used to dictate what most of the departments were doing. Most of the work they were doing was implementing directives and whatever that came from the European Union. Now they sit there coming up with policies for implementing net zero, and it dominates everything.
There is a reason that Brussels was very fond of that, right? Because actually it didn't like, technocratic government doesn't really like being accountable at the ballot box. But coming up, my friends, the King presented his annual message on Christmas Day, but it seems that you at home have had a mixed response. Let me know your thoughts. I'm Darren Grimes, and we're only on GB News.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
If you're hoping to escape the grey skies of the UK and seek some sunshine across Europe, then western parts are your best bet over the next few days. With high pressure in charge here, areas of Iberia, southern France and into Italy are going to see a good amount of brightness at the moment. In the east, though, we've got Storm Elena affecting parts of Greece, Cyprus and Turkey. This is bringing strong winds and heavy rain, and this will be continuing over the next few days to come as well.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News travel destinations forecast.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Joined by international life coach Cheryl Findlay, who has joined forces with a Liverpool business owner, Kate Hill, of sustainable sportswear brand Lola Star, to empower women and inspire women across the nation. And to celebrate this partnership with the new Lola Star collection, the two will be hosting an exclusive event next Saturday.
The sportswear brand was launched after, well, your story. You lost how much weight?
So 16 stone, which is over 220 pounds, which
wow.
I know is quite significant. But during that kind of decade-long journey, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about what it takes to be successful, to be happy, to be well, and to just live an incredible life every day.
Are you giving them goals to work towards or helping them structure their life?
Yeah, so I don't give out goals, absolutely not. It's all about whatever an individual wants. So what we do to begin with is we understand, like, where are you now? Where are you thriving? Where do you feel really happy and excited in your life? And what's lacking? Like, where would you like to feel better? Where would you like to improve? And then we take it from there.
I'd love to take that on board. I'd love to be my true self and fulfil my potential. So have you got any practical tips on how to do that?
Yeah, so we start with clarity, right? Like, you need to know, it's such a busy, fast-paced world we live in. There's so much sensory overload. You know, it'd be so easy to be distracted. So we need to kind of quiet all that noise down and start with, where do I want to focus? Pick 2 or 3 things. Where do I want to focus? And then we define the goal. What would I like that area of my life to look, not just look like, but feel like? And then we take it from there. So that's where you would start. I actually had a cancer diagnosis in 2019.
Oh.
And I just decided if I was going to be lucky enough to be on the other side of it, I wasn't going to play small anymore.
GB News, the people's...
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And
the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, His Majesty the King presented his annual message on Christmas Day, but it seems some of you have had a mixed response to it. Some have disagreed with the King's praise of Britain as a multicultural success story. Here are some sections if you missed it. He said, "I was reminded constantly of the strength which institutions as well as individuals can draw from one another, and of how diversity of culture, ethnicity and faith provides strength, not weakness." He goes on, "Across the Commonwealth, we are held together by a willingness to listen to each other, to learn from one another, and to find just how much we have in common, because through listening we learn to respect our differences, to defeat prejudice, and to open up new possibilities." And then on what took place in the summer, he says, after, of course, that Southport a horrible incident, in response to anger and lawlessness in several towns this summer, communities came together, not to repeat those behaviours, but to repair, to repair trust by listening and through understanding, deciding how to act for the good of all. Now, that was His Majesty the King. Now, a lot of you have written in, and half says, I've always supported the royal family, but I was so disappointed with the King's speech this year, and I don't think I can support him anymore. He, like the PM, is so out of touch with what the majority of people think. Does he really want mass immigration with our beautiful towns and cities being taken over and now unrecognisable? And a few other comments. One says, our King is not a patch on our all-devoted Queen Elizabeth. Now, unlike James here, I am not a Republican. I believe in the institution of monarchy and want to protect it. But I worry that making such a contentious statement like diversity is our strength, that you cannot, after a year that we've had this year, in the weekly deluge of hate marches that have taken place on the streets of London, that diversity is our strength.
So...
And you're about to defend the King as a Republican.
I watched the King's speech and I thought it was a decent moral message about how we all come together and live together. I thought it was a perfectly decent thing. And I find it strange that it's being castigated as being political. He didn't seem to make political points. He was making moral points, and moral points that he was addressing. I mean, you have to remember... He isn't. I may not want to have a monarchy, but he's not just our king, right? He's to all of his so-called subjects all around the world, which is an extremely diverse, multi-faith, multi-ethnic.
No, he wasn't.
No, he wasn't. In that, but he was.
And
then he said about what happened in the summer. He rightly said that the response of people coming together to listen to each other, to repair their buildings, for people to go and help repair the mosque in Southport, that was the spirit of the people that we would like to be. And I think, of course, he's right in that.
Daniel, one of our viewers, Christine, says the King is speaking from his ivory tower. Has he been mugged lately? I mean, the point Christine's making there is that His Majesty the King is far removed from living in a town in which English is poorly spoken, if at all, and how multiculturalism has simply not worked.
Well, he is far removed from that. That has to be said. But at the same time, as James pointed out, this is an address every year, as it was under his mother, not just to Britain, but to the whole Commonwealth. And the section in which he talked about listening to each other and diversity is our strength and fighting prejudice, if you put it up again, it actually begins, as far as he's talking to the Commonwealth. He starts by saying, this is for the Commonwealth. And of course, listening to other countries in the Commonwealth, which is a huge group of nations when you think about it, it's 50 or 60 countries, listening to them, to each other. And the fact is that we've actually stuck together as a Commonwealth, and we haven't sort of broadly gone to war with each other and so on. We're not a military alliance, but these are peaceful and friendly nations we get on with, and we should listen to them.
Okay.
As far as the diversity, if you want to apply that to the UK, and I don't think he was specifically doing so, I think he is a little bit out of touch as far as that's concerned. I don't think that's a great criticism of the King, because it's part of being a king that you are going to be a bit out of touch. But I think I won't hear a word said against the King. Basically, I'm a monarchist.
I think
we are a diverse country.
Right, we're sadly going to have to leave that there, because Andy says, I believe the King mentioned the riots, but not the 3 little girls. That's another point, to be honest. But thank you very much to my panel, to James and to Daniel. And up next, my friends, is Lee Anderson. So all that's left to say is na-night, as Michelle would say.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this weekend, there's still going to be lots of cloud and murk around, also some drizzle, but likely to see some brighter skies by the time we reach Sunday. And where we're seeing those areas of more persistent rain and drizzle is just to the far northwest of the country, where we do have a frontal system, and elsewhere we do have high pressure, bringing lots of settled conditions, but lots of cloud and moisture trapped underneath that high. And it remains fairly similar as we head into the overnight period. Still plenty of cloud around, a chance we could see some drizzle with more persistent areas of rain just to the far northwest of Scotland, slowly edging its way into western parts of Northern Ireland by the early hours of Saturday. And those cloudy skies means temperatures aren't going to change too much compared to what they were during the day, mostly in the mid-single figures. To start off the weekend then, across the northwest of Scotland, a damp start with outbreaks of rain, but to the very far north we may see some clearer spells, though we can't rule out some showers just moving in around coasts. And elsewhere across Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, still plenty of cloud around, some outbreaks of rain and drizzle just to the west of Northern Ireland, and fairly similar across England and Wales too. Cloudy with some fog around, some plenty of grey skies around to start the weekend too, and still some drizzly outbreaks, particularly around hilly areas. And it remains fairly similar through much of the day, though those longer spells of rain just moving into the Scottish borders, northern parts of England towards the end of the day. And clearer to the north of this, may see some sunny spells here, but still plenty of showers moving in around coasts. And temperatures around the same, once again struggling under cloudier skies, so feeling chilly where you do see the grey skies. And then for Sunday, once again, still plenty of cloud around, but by the afternoon likely to see a few more sunnier spells, but still plenty of rain across Scotland and some quite strong winds here at times for the second half of the weekend too. But on the whole, likely the better day of the weekend for many, but turning unsettled as we head into the new year with strong winds and some heavy outbreaks of rain.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
A very good evening. I'm Johnny Ratner. There are long queues in Oxfordshire on the M40 tonight. The inside lane on that three-lane stretch is blocked off northbound just after junction 11, the Banbury exit, after a car overturned. Long queues on the opposite side of the carriageway due to onlookers. The A1M in Hertfordshire is now blocked southbound junction 9 to 8 between Letchworth and Stevenage following an accident. There are still long queues on the M11 in Essex heading south just south of junction 9 at the scene of a crash. In southeast London, the Belgrove Road, the A207 at Welling is blocked by a collision, and in Hampshire the M3 is blocked southbound at junction 11 south of Winchester following an accident involving a couple of lorries. Trains are suspended through London Paddington and London Liverpool Street Station today because of the engineering works and disruption at both Gatwick and Heathrow Airport because of the foggy conditions. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Imagine getting the call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
Brilliant. That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock.
I'd say don't hesitate, do it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome to the Andersons' Real World. Tonight on the show we have Elvis tribute act Rick Gaynor. We also have Rory Green on the show for the first time. trade unionist Andy Twelves and self-proclaimed anarchist. That's Dr. Lisa McKenzie. But first, let's go to the news.
Hello there, the latest headlines from the GB News Centre. And GB News can confirm that more than 1,000 migrants have now crossed the English Channel since Christmas Day, as hundreds more crossed today. It comes as the Home Office confirmed 407 arrived on Boxing Day. 451 made the illegal crossing on Christmas Day. On Friday so far, 5 small boats have crossed from France with at least 200 migrants on board. They take the total number who've arrived in the UK this year to more than 36,000. It also marks another grim milestone of 150,000 small boat migrants since the crisis began in 2018. The Prime Minister has paid tribute to his brother Nick, who died on Boxing Day after suffering from cancer. Sir Keir said in a statement, "My brother Nick was a wonderful man. He met all the challenges life threw at him with courage and good humour." Downing Street has confirmed the Prime Minister has now cancelled his planned holiday to be with his family. The UK's national rail network is facing severe disruption as major engineering works, including for HS2, are prioritised over the coming days. Western services out of Paddington are particularly badly affected. To add to the misery, Avanti workers are preparing to stage a series of strikes over pay negotiations. Travel expert Simon Calder said the work was necessary.
The